This podcast is brought to you by Alldus International, supplying your expert AI and digital transformation staffing needs across the US and Europe. Today, you are listening to our AI in Action series, where leading minds in AI from across the world share their story, success, and advice. AI in Action cuts through the hype and explores the true impact of artificial intelligence in our world today.
Welcome to the AI in Cyber podcast. My name is Mark Kelly and you are listening to our podcast in Dublin. I'm very, very happy to welcome Jason Scanlon. Jason is a CISO at a company called Numata. Jason, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast today.
Good morning, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Tell me a little bit about your background. How did you get into the world of cyber?
Sure, yeah. I suppose I started off my career in a small managed services firm based here in Limerick in Ireland. And I suppose started on the service desk like any person does straight out of college. Worked my way up internally, got to a role of consultancy, but I was with that firm for about 20 years, over 20 years. In that time, you get a great, I suppose, experience because you're going to multiple different size clients, multiple different types of industries. And then I left there because I wanted to see what the other side of the world had to offer outside of the managed services space. And I went and served as an IT manager for an automation company in Shannon in County Clare. And that's when COVID happened, actually. So I was no sooner in the job when COVID happened, and you learn quite fast on the job. But during that time also, I had upskilled and sat some courses with the EC Council, and then went on to become a certified CISO. And then I suppose Numata came knocking, just through from discussions really, and I came on board with them a little over 4.5 years ago now as their CISO. So we're a global-based MSP. It's headquartered out of Johannesburg, with a presence in Ireland, the UK and in the US. And I suppose it's during that time and it's during the learnings that I've had on the job, together with the continuous education piece that I do, that I arrived at becoming a CISO.
It's an interesting one because you've got to see the other side of the fence, obviously particularly challenging circumstances, but it must have been a decade learning in a year with the amount of different types of changes that were there. Do you think that kind of shaped your outlook?
I suppose looking back on it now, I mean, as I said earlier on, when you're in it, you don't probably realise that you're in it. But looking back, there's great learnings to be had. And I think, for anyone starting their career, and I've often been asked that question, how would you get into IT or how would you get into cyber? And I think one of the greatest exposures you have is within a managed services company. And the reason I say that is because, again, I talk about, I suppose, the chances within there, the clients you go and meet, the industries that you come across. There isn't a sector you won't touch. I've been very privileged in my career that I've touched a lot of sectors, and we've spent a lot of time in the aviation leasing sector as well, which is unique to Ireland. It's a very strong industry in Ireland. But yeah, absolutely, and that has garnered and got me to where I am today. I've been involved in the HSE as well, and other clients like the rehab group here in Ireland. But yeah, I think starting anyone's career, if you can get exposure into an MSP environment, I think it's really good for your breadth and depth.
Where do you think MSPs need to kind of focus on in terms of their competitive differentiation?
In terms of what makes them different?
Yeah, because it's very hard to stand out now, isn't it?
Absolutely. And there's plenty of MSPs, there's plenty of choice, right? I think I look at, I suppose, the next wave of what's going to happen. It's going to be outcome based, right? No longer is it going to be sufficient to say we keep the lights on. Okay, I think that's a given. It is a given nowadays. Yeah. So what more value add are you going to bring to this equation? So as your business advisor, your IT advisor, what am I going to bring to your day-to-day operations? And that's where you got to look at the outcomes, and that's where you got to match up, I suppose, what your business is, for argument's sake, what your goals and objectives, what's your strategy, and then we will come in and try and align the technology roadmap to that and make that based on genuine outcomes, realistic outcomes, and realise that, let's get maybe 2 or 3 outcomes per year rather than worry about trying to promise you 10 outcomes and me only delivering 2.
Yeah, but it takes time to bed in.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's the key thing. And I think I always spoke about how time is money. And I think sometimes we lack the patience at times. We want it. It's almost like, I want AI, when do you want it? I want it now, kind of thing. And we've got to realise that. And that's why I often speak about the human element of that as well. We've got to set expectations.
Where do you see kind of GRC at this moment in time? What's happening? It's such a strange, interesting time to be alive.
It is. And I think, we look back and there's been a lot of talk, I suppose, about CISO consulting and vCISOs and virtual CIOs and things like that. And I think that GRC itself is a key component. And, having gone through my own experiences, the G part, we're actually quite good at the risk and compliance. Always room for improvement, for sure. I think where we might let ourselves down is governance. And the reason I say that is within a small business environment particularly, we know there's certain things we can and should be doing. We don't always necessarily do them. And even take that at an enterprise level. And if you look at the Jaguar attack, there are gaps in governance. And what I'm learning from that, and based on my own experiences, you can have all the technology you want, but if you're missing your key foundational steps in terms of processes and policies and procedures, it'll fall apart, I think, on the day.
Yeah, and the basics never get old, do they?
Correct, they don't. And it's not like governance is something new to us. It's been around a long time. And I think a lot of us know the solutions to our problems, It's just trying to face them is always a difficult thing, I think.
Yeah. How do you stay up to speed with all the different types of changes?
So there's a lot going on, isn't there? If you look at the regulatory landscape in Europe in particular, I suppose I was very fortunate in my career where we were, always incentivized to continuously do exams, whether they be Microsoft exams, EC Council, etc. So that way, I always, even today, I'll be going back and doing some study later on, preparing for my next exam. And I think that's a key component when you get into this industry. You have to kind of upskill and keep on top. No one's asking you to be an expert, but just have a general broad basis and understanding so that you are confident to speak about certain topics.
Yeah. AI feels incredibly topical. You've had things like OpenClaw, which formerly known as Maltbot, formerly known as CloudBot. We've now got an AI that can go onto your own PC, your own device, and you can use WhatsApp to control it, right? An additional employee. On the back of Claude co-work the week before that, AI agents seem like they're coming, the good, the bad, and the vulnerable. How do you see AI weaving in and impacting cyber in the next short to medium term?
So OpenClaw and that really exploded last week at Moltbook, didn't it, online, and the vulnerability that was highlighted. But it's scary and intriguing all in one, isn't it? I suppose, again, we've got to be careful at how we adopt AI. I'm all for, I think a lot of CISOs are kind of, scared, but, we don't want to be seen as blockers. And that's the key thing. We're not blockers, or we shouldn't be. We're saying yes, but. And I think that's the key differential. It's not a no, it's a yes, but. It will come in, and to your point, it's there already, right? So, we can't stop it. But what we do need to do is make sure that we have the basis and the grounding and secure our environment so that when we start to use AI agents or agentic AI, that done so controlled and with an educated workforce. It's definitely going to come in, particularly, I think, in cybersecurity with a lot of triage and a lot of, when a lot of alerts come in. I mean, our guys deal with, on average, maybe 30,000 alerts a day, right? So there is definitely a role for AI to come in there and, I suppose, refine that and get rid of a lot of that noise and that alert fatigue that we speak about in cybersecurity. So there is advantages, and I do think, those are the kind of things that we can use AI for, but still very important to keep the human in the loop.
Yeah, because when you think about it, you're grounded in the basics. You're providing literacy now for people on what AI isn't what it is. But also, if you say no or you lean with no, you're still trying to get over shadow IT.
Correct.
Now we've got shadow AI. You really do need to meet people where they're at, though, as well.
Absolutely, and that's why I said again, it has to be a yes, but rather than a no. And I think particularly now the role of the CISO is changing as well. And like we've got to realise that CISOs only, that term was really coined in the mid 1990s, right? So we still got a long way to go in terms of what the role is and how it's evolving.
Yeah.
And we do have to meet people halfway, to your point. And I will also say the key role of a CISO now is to be much of an influencer / enabler within the business. Okay, so building up those key relationships with the CFO, with the chief risk officer, etc., and saying to them, yes, this can be done, and I want to help and support you. We just got to do it in a manner that's good for you and good for me and secure.
But you've also got now vendors. I think Gartner say something like 86% of vendors are going to be introducing some type of AI feature this year. So not even like 27 or 28 this year. How do you manage that? And how do you actually kind of get people aligned to know that, well, actually you're accepting something that could be classed as a deployer that could negatively impact your employees or your customers, you better beware.
Yeah, and I think again, I suppose that goes back to educating those internally within your business around the risks, okay, and what's the impact to my business. And I think if we can speak in those terminologies, not so much on the technical side, but in terms of the risk, the impact, and make it aware to them of what kind of risks can come in and what kind of benefits you can get from it, and then make an educated or an informed decision. Absolutely, it's every day you look at it, there's either a new AI startup or there's another AI vendor or there's existing vendors leveraging AI.
Yeah.
So it's a very noisy space for sure. How will you get it right? It's going to be a balancing act, and I think there will be an element of trial and error. That's just my own personal opinion. And I think so long as we can make good, informed, educated decisions that are recorded for the governance purposes, I think, in the days of something happening or a breach that happen, so long as you're able to showcase to most regulators that you've done a particular piece of work or body of work or came to a conclusion soundly and reasonably, I would hope that they would have a bit more leniency when they're dealing with you.
And have you got a certain approach? Do you kind of look to build on 27001 to 42001, or what's your kind of mindset being and kind of going on this journey?
So that's an interesting one, Mark, and I think the more mature the business is, the more they should be looking at an ISO 27001. I've seen situations in the past where businesses, they might only be in existence a couple of years and they want an ISO 27001. And a lot of companies can say, yeah, we can give you that. And they can. I would prefer to take a slightly different approach. And what I mean by that is, yes, by all means, depending on the maturity of your business, let's take a look at where you are first. And if you want to get an ISO 27001, depending on your maturity, yes, we can give you that, but we'll give it to you within a realistic time frame. I'm not going to say 6 to 12 months. So what we do in Numata is very much based on the CIS controls framework. Okay. Now, the CIS controls framework, again, is an ideal framework, although it's not a certification, but it'll embed those basics within your business. Okay. And if you can move through those groups, those implementation groups, then that'll stand you in good stead for an ISO 27001. So you're doing the basics, the really simple stuff within. If you look at IG1, there's about 17 or 18 control areas within that. If you can get those nailed, and then you can go back to the business and say, listen, we are making progress here. And eventually by year 2, 3, we'll have an ISO 27001.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most logical way of doing it.
So you're really managing their expectations that it's a journey. They're not biting off too much.
Correct.
And they're just kind of walking.
Yeah. So again, it's I always say it's a bit like if you wanted to run a marathon, Mark, right? The first thing you need to do is get off the couch, right? And you're going to do that in a way that says, okay, listen, I'm going to set realistic goals for myself. I'm going to learn how to run a 5K.
Yeah. And
you're going to build on that gradually, with the overall aim of being, yes, within X amount of time, I'm going to be able to run a marathon.
Yeah, and it's also kind of building those habits. And we stay on that analogy. It's packing the bag the night before.
Correct.
It's not ordering the takeaway, having your food prepped.
Absolutely.
It's trying to have your shoes ready to go. So it's trying to allow certain trigger points to ensure that it's done correctly. And then just bringing back those basics for training, for literacy, and then adding in where you need to see fit is probably the most important area, I would have thought.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've seen time and time again, big organizations, big enterprises have fabulous technology and stacks at their disposal, and yet they still get hit.
Yeah.
Right, so we have to ask ourselves why. And maybe it does come back to that. Maybe the foundational steps have been missed once or twice, or maybe they were there, but they've kind of slackened off on managing them.
Where do you see it going in the next 12 to 18 months? $1 million question, but do we lean in more to the technical side as leaders? Do we start to get in more specialists to work in? It feels like the role as a CISO has become more challenging than ever.
It is, and I think, most research would tend to indicate that the life of the CISO in terms of staying within the position is reducing, right? It was about 2 to 3 years, now it's coming down to about 1.5 to 2 years. So it's a high pressurized role for sure. But I think, the role of the CISO, I always say, it can't just be on any one individual. I mean, it's growing bigger and bigger. You've got to enable the CISO to be able to do their job. You've got to give them the budget, you've got to give them the resources. But equally, I always talk about, when D-Day lands in your business, when that ransomware attack, for argument's sake, hits, you got to have that multidisciplinary approach.
Yeah.
It's because everyone can bring something to that table. A project manager, a HR person, a legal person, So I think we need to get away from having this siloed approach of having the CISO, he or she is all singing and all dancing, responsible for all my security.
Yeah.
And I think we need to take a more collaborative approach. Now, a lot of people might say, well, hang on, that's your job. It says it under your responsibility, your list of duties, etc. It does, to a certain degree. But the other side of that coin is if you're a software house, is it your job also then to as a CISO, to make sure that your developers securely develop software? So I think there's pros and cons to it. But I think, going forward, I do think we need to address, I suppose, how we support the CISO and how the CISO supports the business.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's multifaceted and it's
Correct.
changing all the time. It's kind of a burning platform. So I wouldn't be surprised in the next 6 months something dramatically changes that's going to actually pretty change our perspective or perception of certain aspects. But the basics don't get old. And just doing them right and building on a good foundation of habits is a good place to end it.
Absolutely. And we've seen that again, time and time again, from a lot of attacks. Having those good processes in place, can make a huge difference. Because anyone that's been in this position, and I have a few times, unfortunately, it's not a nice place to be, Mark, and it does take a toll, both, I suppose, on the individual or on the group, but it definitely does take a toll.
Yeah.
And it's something I've blogged about quite a bit in terms of the psychological impact of that.
Yeah.
And we've got to be very mindful of that. And that's why I always say that, when you sit down with HR and you look at employee mental health and well-being strategies for your business, you should be bringing in the CISO, because, if something does happen to your business and you get out of it after 6 or 12 months and certain people don't get plaudits or, don't feel good or don't get the necessary breaks during the crisis time, it could come back to haunt you.
Yeah, let's take it for granted as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the mental impact is something we don't talk about enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just becomes routine for that person to be always on alert and managing
Correct.
through that area. And that's not normal, but they've normalized it.
Yes, absolutely. And, I like to think that we live in a world, I don't think anyone deliberately makes a mistake. I'd like to think that. I know it's probably a bit naive of me at times, but when mistakes happen, again, we've got to realise that it's a mistake, unless it's malicious, unless someone, unless we can prove that they did mean to do that. And I think, and I go back to those instances we've had in the HSC and within the rehab group, we've got to be very careful that we don't want to victimise the person as well that might have caused something to happen.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Listen, who hasn't made a bad decision when they're tired or...
Correct. Absolutely. And we've got to realise, threat actors are very, very clever, right? Going back to your AI conversation, they're using AI as much as we are in defending. So they're very clever and very astute. I think, so removing fear and removing blame to me are big things that we need to get better at as well.
Yeah, because there's a psychological aspect, and then there's the AI aspect that's just going to be ready and waiting at your kind of lowest to follow through on that. Jason, thank you very much for being on the podcast today. Great to hear your insights.
Listen, thanks very much, Mark, for having
me. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Alldus podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any Android podcast of choice. You can also head over to our website, www.alldus.com, to listen to more podcasts, view our open roles, and stay up to date with industry news. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more great episodes coming very soon.